If you love reading or just prefer to listen, welcome to John Smeaton's Regular Reads.
I'd Tell You I Love You, but then I'd have to kill you, by Ali Carter. Chapter 3. Instantly, the corridors went from empty to overflowing as girls ran and staff members hurried and the red lights continued to pulse off and on. A shelf of trophies spun around, sending the plaques and ribbons commemorating winners in the annual hand-to-hand combat and team code-breaking competitions to the hidden compartment behind the wall, leaving a row of awards from swim meets and debate contests in its place. Above us, in the upper story of the foyer, 3 gold and burgundy learn her skills, honour her sword, and keep her secrets banners rolled miraculously up and were replaced by handmade posters supporting someone named Emily for student council president. Buckingham dragged Bex and me up the sweeping staircase as a flock of newbies ran down, screeching at the top of their lungs. I remembered what those sirens had sounded like the first time I'd heard them. It was no wonder the girls were acting like it was the end of the world. Buckingham yelled, "Girls!" and silenced them. "Follow Madame Daubeny. She's going to take you to the stables for the afternoon. And ladies," she snapped at a pair of dark-haired twins who seemed to be especially frantic, "composure." And then Buckingham whirled and raced up the staircase to the second-storey landing, where Mr. Moskowitz and Mr. Smith were trying to wheel a statue of Eleanor Everett, the Gallagher girl who had once disabled a bomb in the White House with her teeth, to a broom closet. We swept through the Hall of History, where Gilligan's sword slid smoothly into the vault beneath its case, like Excalibur returning to the Lady of the Lake, and was replaced by a bust of a man with enormous ears who was supposedly the school's first headmaster. The entire school was in a state of organised chaos. Bex and I shared a questioning look, because we were supposed to be downstairs, helping the other sophomores check the main level for anything spy-related that someone might have left lying around. But Buckingham turned and snapped, "Girls, hurry!" She sounded less like the soft elderly teacher we knew, and more like the woman who had single-handedly taken out a Nazi machine gun post on D-Day. I heard a crash behind us, followed by some Polish expletives, and I knew that the Eleanor Everett statue was probably in a billion pieces. But at the end of the Hall of History, my mum was leaning against the double doors of her office, dropping an M&M into her mouth as calmly as if she were waiting to pick me up from soccer practice, acting like it was just an ordinary day. Her long dark hair fell across the shoulder of her black trousers suit. A wisp of fringe brushed across a flawless forehead that she swears I'll have too, just as soon as my hormones stop waging war with my pores. Sometimes I'm seriously glad that we live 90% of our lives inside the mansion, because whenever we do leave, I have to watch men drool over my mother, or ask if we're sisters, which totally freaks me out, even though I know I should be flattered that anyone would think I was related to her at all. In short, my mum's a hottie. "Hey, Cam, Rebecca," she said, before turning to Buckingham. "Thanks for bringing them, Patricia. Come inside a sec." Inside her office, thanks to its soundproofed walls, the mayhem of the rest of the school completely faded away. Light streamed through leaded windows and flashed upon mahogany panelling and floor-to-ceiling bookcases that were, even as we spoke, spinning round to hide tombs like Poisons Through the Ages and A Praetorian's Guide to an Honourable Death, replacing them with a flip side of volumes like Educating the Upper Echelon and Private Education Monthly. There was a photo on her desk of the two of us on vacation in Russia, and I watched in awe as we hugged and smiled in the frame, while, in the background, the Kremlin was replaced by Cinderella's castle at Disney World. "Holographic radio-synthesized photo paper," Mum said when she saw my gaping mouth. Dr. Phibbs whipped up a batch in his lab over the summer. Hungry? She held her cupped hand towards Bex and me. Amazingly, I'd forgotten all about my empty stomach, but I took a green piece for good luck. Something told me we were going to need it. Girls, I need you to do a tour. But we're sophomores, Bex exclaimed, as if my mother had mysteriously forgotten. Mum's mouth was full of chocolate, so Buckingham explained. The juniors are beginning their term with interrogation tactics, so they're all under the influence of sodium pentothal at the moment, and the seniors are being fitted with their night vision contacts, and they won't undilate for at least 2 hours. This is most unfortunate timing, but code reds are such for a reason. We don't know when they'll happen, and, well, one is happening now. What do you say? Mum asked, smiling. Can you help us out? There are 3 things a person has to be before they show up uninvited on the doorstep of the Gallagher Academy for exceptional young women. Persistent, powerful, and completely out of other options. After all, most potential pupils never make it past the "we are not accepting applications at this time" speech they get whenever they call or write. You have to be turned down by every prep school in the country before you actually drive all the way to Roseville, hoping that a face-to-face visit will change our minds. But no amount of persistence or desperation can get you through the gates. No, for that, it takes real power. That's why Bex and I were standing on the front steps, waiting for the black stretch limousine that carried the McHenry family, yes, those McHenrys, the ones on the cover of last December's Newsweek, to drive down the winding lane. They were the kind of people who aren't easily turned away, and we learned a long time ago that the best place to hide is in plain sight. So Bex and I were there to welcome them to Gallagher Academy for exceptional young women. Our mission? To make sure they never know just how exceptional we really are. The man who stepped out of the limo wore a charcoal grey suit jacket and power tie. The woman looked like the cosmetics heiress she was, not a hair or lash out of place, and I wondered if my cherry lip gloss would impress her. Judging from the scowl on her face, it didn't. "Senator," Bex said, extending her hand towards the man, sounding as American as apple pie and loving the charade. "Welcome to the Gallagher Academy. It's an honour to have you with us today." I thought she was laying it on a little thick until Senator McHenry smiled and said, "Thank you. It's wonderful to be here," as if he didn't realise she couldn't vote. "I'm Rebecca," Bex said. "This is Cameron." The senator glanced at me, then looked quickly back to Bex, who looked like a picture-perfect model of an elite education. "We're happy to show you and that's when Bex and I both realised that their daughter hadn't appeared. "Is your daughter going to be—" But just then, a black combat boot emerged from the limousine. "Darling," the senator said, pointing towards the stables, "come look, they have horses." "Oh, is that what I smell?" Mrs. McHenry said with a shudder. "For the record, our school smells just fine, unless of course your smelling ability has been irreparably damaged by a lifetime of sniffing perfume samples." But the senator glared at his wife and said, "Macey loves horses." "No, Macey hates horses," Mrs. McHenry said, narrowing her eyes and glancing towards Bex and me as if to remind the senator not to contradict her in front of the help. "She fell off one and broke her arm." I was thinking about disrupting this little display of domestic bliss to tell them both that there weren't any horses in the stables, just freaked out 7th graders and a former French spy who had invented a way of sending coded messages in cheese, when a voice said, "Yeah, they make great glue." Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure Macey McHenry had never touched a horse in her life. Her legs were long and athletic. Her clothes, though punk and rebellious, were definitely high-end, and the diamond in her nose was at least 1.5 carats. Her hair might have been stark black and bluntly cut, but it was also thick and shiny, and it framed a face that belonged on the cover of a magazine. I've seen enough TV and movies to know that if a girl like Macey McHenry can't survive high school, then someone like me would probably get eaten alive. And yet, something had driven her to our gates, making us her last resort, or so her parents thought. I stammered, because I may be a whiz at poison concocting, but good at public speaking I'm not. We're really happy to have you here. Then why did you keep us sitting? Mrs. McHenry cocked her head towards the iron gates. Out there for over an hour. I'm afraid that's standard protocol for people who come without appointments, Bex said in her most honest studenty voice. Security is a top concern here at the Gallagher Academy. If your daughter were to go here, you could expect that same level of protection. But Mrs. McHenry's hands were on her hips when she snapped, Don't you know who he is? Don't you know? We were on our way back to Washington, the senator stepped in, cutting his wife off, and we just couldn't resist bringing Macey by for a visit. He sent his wife a, "This is our last chance, don't blow it," look, as he added, and the security is most impressive. Bex opened the front doors and welcomed them inside, but all I could do was watch them go and think, Senator, you have no idea. Bex and I got to sit in Mum's office as she went through her standard speech about the school's history. Really, it's not all that different from the truth, just abridged. A lot. We have graduates working all over the world, Mum said, and I thought, yeah, as spies. We focus on languages, maths, science, and culture. Those are the things our graduates tell us they've needed most in their lives, as spies. By admitting only young women, our pupils develop a sense of empowerment, which enables them to be highly successful, as spies. I was just starting to enjoy my little game when Mum turned to Bex and said, Rebecca, why don't you and Cammie show Macey around? And I knew it was showtime. Bex glowed, but all I could do was think about how we'd only had one half of a covert operations course, yet we were already going on a mission. How was I supposed to know how to act? Sure, if Macey wanted to learn Chinese characters or break KGB codes, I was perfectly trained. But our mission was to act normally, and that's something I'm totally not qualified to do. Luckily, Bex just likes to act, full stop. Senator, Bex said, gripping his hand, it was an honour meeting you, sir. And you too, ma'am. She smiled at Mrs. McHenry. So glad that you both... Thank you, Rebecca. Mum cut Bex off with her don't overdo it voice. Macey stood, and with a flurry of her ultra miniskirt, was through the door and into the Hall of History without even a glance at her parents. Macey was leaning against a cabinet that normally chronicled the history of the gas mask, a device on which the Gallagher Academy holds the patent, thank you very much, lighting up a cigarette when we caught up. She took a long, confident drag and then blew smoke towards the ceiling that probably held a dozen different kinds of sensors, the least of which was for smoke. You've got to put that out, Bex said, entering the make sure she knows she'd be miserable here phase of the operation. At the Gallagher Academy, we value personal health and safety. Macey looked at Bex as if she'd been speaking Chinese. I had to think for a moment to make sure she hadn't. No smoking, I translated, as I pulled an empty aluminium can from a recycling bin at the top of the stairs and held it towards her. She took another drag and then looked at me as if to say she'd stub out her cigarette when I forced her, which I could, of course, but she wasn't supposed to know that. Fine, I said, and turned to stalk off. Your lungs. But Bex was glaring at her, and unlike me, she actually looked capable of throwing someone off the landing. So with one last drag, our guest dropped the cigarette into the empty Diet Coke can and followed me down the stairs as a wave of girls pushed past us. "It's lunchtime," I explained, realising that the green M&M had gotten together with the Tic Tac in my stomach and were trying to convince me that they would like some company. "We can go eat if you want." "I don't think so," Macey cried, with a roll of her eyes. But stupid me jumped to say, "Really, the food here is great," which totally didn't serve our mission objective, since gross food is usually a pretty good turn-off. But our chef is amazing. He actually worked at the White House before this incident involving Fluffy, the first poodle, a gastronomical chemical agent, and some very questionable cheese. Luckily, a Gallagher girl saved poor Fluffy's life. So, to show his appreciation, Chef Louis came to us and brought his awesome creme brulee with him. I started to mention the creme brulee, but then Macey exclaimed, "I eat 800 calories a day." Bex and I looked at each other amazed. We probably burned that many calories during one session of P&E, Protection and Enforcement, class. Macey studied us sceptically, then added, "Food is so yesterday." Unfortunately, that was the last time I'd had some. We reached the foyer and I said, "This is the Grand Hall," because that sounded like a school Tory thing to say, but Macey acted like I wasn't even there, as she turned to Bex, her physical equal, and said, "So everyone wears those uniforms." I found this to be particularly offensive, having been on the uniform selection committee, but Bex just fingered her knee-length navy tartan skirt and matching white blouse and said, "We even wear them during gym class." Good one, I thought, taking in the horror on Macey's face as Bex stepped towards the east corridor and said, "Here we have the library." But Macey was heading down another hallway. "What's down here?" And just like that, she was gone, passing classrooms and hidden passageways with every step. Bex and I jogged to keep up with her, throwing out pieces of made-up trivia like, "That painting was a gift from the Duke of Edinburgh," or, "Oh yes, the Wisenhouse Memorial Chandelier," or my personal favourite, "This is the Washington Memorial Chalkboard." It really is a nice chalkboard. Bex was in the middle of a pretty believable story about how, if a girl gets a perfect score on a test, she's allowed to watch 1 whole hour of television that week, when Macey plopped down in one of my favourite window seats, pulled out a mobile phone, and proceeded to make a call right in front of us without so much as an "excuse me." Rude. The joke was on her though, since, after dialing in the number, she held the device out in front of her in bewilderment. Bex and I glanced at each other, and then I tried to sound all sympathetic as I said, "Yeah, mobile phones don't work here." True. "We're too far from a tower," Bex added. False. We'd actually have great mobile reception if it weren't for the monster jammer that blocks any and all foreign transmissions from school grounds. But Macey McHenry and her Capitol Hill father certainly didn't need to know that. "No mobile phones," Macey said, as if we'd just told her all pupils were required to shave their heads and live on bread and water. "That's it. I'm so out of here." And then she turned and stormed back towards my mum's office. At least she thought that was the way to my mum's office. She was nearing the doors that led down to the Research and Development Department in the basement. I was pretty sure Dr. Phibbs would have everything in code red form, but in the tradition of mad scientists everywhere, Dr. Phibbs had a tendency to be a little, shall we say, accident-prone. Sure enough, as we turned the corner, we saw Mr. Moskowitz, who happened to be the world's foremost authority on data encryption, but he didn't look like a mega genius just then. No, he looked like the resident alcoholic. His eyes were bloodshot and watering, his face was pale, and he was totally stumbling and slurring his words as he said, "Hello!" Macey stared at him in disgust, which was actually a good thing, because that way she didn't notice the thick fog of purple smoke that was seeping beneath the stairwell doors behind him. Professor Buckingham was shoving towels in the cracks, but every time she got near the purple fog, she'd start sneezing uncontrollably. She kicked the towel with her foot. Dr. Phibbs appeared with a roll of duct tape and started trying to seal the cracks around the doors. How's that for super spy technology? Mr. Moskowitz kept swaying back and forth, maybe because the purple stuff had messed with his sense of balance, or maybe because he was trying to block Macey's view, which would have been tough considering he can't be an inch taller than 5'5". He said, "I understand you're a potential student." But just then, Dr. Phibbs's tall, lanky frame crashed onto the floor. He was out cold, and the purple smoke was growing thicker. Bex and I looked at each other. This is seriously not good. Buckingham hauled Dr. Phibbs into a teacher's chair and started rolling him away, but I didn't have a clue what to do. Bex grabbed Macey's arm. "Come on, Macey, I know a short..." But Macey only wrenched her arm out of Bex's grasp and said, "Don't touch me." Yeah, that's right, she called Bex the B word. Now see, here's where the whole private school thing puts a girl at a disadvantage. MTV will lead us to believe that the B word has become a term of endearment or slang among equals, but I still mainly think of it as the insult of choice for the inarticulate. So either Macey hated us or respected us, but I looked at Bex and I knew that she was betting on the former. Bex stepped forward, shaking off her happy schoolgirl persona and putting on her super spy face. This is seriously not good, I thought again, just as a white shirt and khaki trousers appeared in my peripheral vision. Never again would I wonder if the only reason we thought Mr. Solomon was hot was because we'd been grading on the girls' school curve. One look at Macey McHenry made it perfectly clear that even beyond the walls of the Gallagher Academy, Joe Solomon was gorgeous. And she didn't even know he was a spy, which always makes a guy hotter. "Hello." It was the exact same thing Mr. Moskowitz had said, but oh, was it different. "Welcome to the Gallagher Academy. I hope you're considering joining us," he said. But I'm pretty sure Macey, Bex, and I all heard, "I think you're the most beautiful woman in the world, and I'd be honoured if you'd bear my children." Really, truly, I think he said that. "Are you enjoying your tour?" he said. But Macey just batted her eyelashes and went all seductive in a way that totally didn't go with her combat boots. Maybe it was the cloud of purple smoke wafting towards me, but I thought I might throw up. "Do you have a second?" Mr. Solomon asked, but didn't wait for her to respond before he said, "There's something on the second floor that I'd love to show you." He pointed her towards a circular stone staircase that had once been a fixture in the Gallagher family chapel. Stained glass windows stood 2 stories tall and coloured the light that landed on Mr. Solomon's white shirt as we climbed. When we reached the second floor, he held his arms out at the grand, high-ceilinged corridor that was awash in a kaleidoscope of colour. It was, in a word, beautiful, and yet I'd never really noticed it until then. There had always been classes to get to, assignments to finish. I heard Mr. Solomon's lecture again, notice things, and I couldn't help feeling that we'd just had our first Covops test, and we'd failed. He walked us all the way to the Hall of History before turning and strolling back towards that gorgeous wall of stained glass. As Macey watched him go, she muttered, "Who was that?" It was the first enthusiastic thing Macey had said since crawling out of the limo, and maybe long before that, probably since realising that her father would sell his soul for a vote, and her mother was the B word as used in its traditional context. "He's a new teacher," Bex answered. "Yeah," Macey scoffed, "if you say so." But Bex, who hadn't forgotten the B word incident, wheeled around and said, "I do say so." Macey reached for her pack of cigarettes, but stopped short when Bex's glare hardened. "Let me lay it out for you," Macey said, like it was some big favour. "Best case scenario, all the girls go gaga for him and lose focus, which I'm sure is very important at the Gallagher Academy," she said with mock reverence. "Worst case scenario, he's an inappropriate conduct case looking for a place to happen." I had to admit that, so far, Macey the B word was making some sense. "The only people who teach at these places are freaks and geeks. And when you've got a headmistress who looks like that," she pointed to my mother in all her hotness, who stood talking to the McHenrys 30 feet away, "it's easy to see what Mr. Eye Candy was hired for." "What?" I asked, not understanding. "You're the Gallagher girl," she mocked again. "If you can't figure that out, then who am I to tell you?" I thought about my mother, my beautiful mother, who had recently been winked at by my sexy Covops teacher, and I thought I would never eat again.
Thanks for tuning in. You've been a part of John Smeaton's Regular Read.